So what we're going to go over tonight, we're going to do our typical check-in. So letting me know how your customer interviews are going, and if you are looking for any feedback, if you hit any snags, anything like that you want to talk through with the group, we can do that. Then we're going to go over some important dates to remember for the competition. So in a couple of weeks, the first round is opening up. So just want to make sure everybody's aware of the deadlines to submit for each and kind of what's coming up over the next month. And then the lecture tonight will be over customer acquisition costs and customer lifetime value. So the usual poll here I'm going to launch. Hopefully everybody's more in that 51 to 75 range of customer interviews at this point. If not, and you're close, you have a couple of weeks to really get a bunch of those interviews in, and you can continue doing them after you turn in your round one submission. But I would try to get the bulk of them done before you do that, so you really know your whole customer discovery journey before you submit a video talking about it. So it looks like a lot of you have done at least 25 or so. That's pretty good. I have this as anonymous, so I can't see, but somebody has done more than 75, so that's awesome. All right. And if you weren't with us last workshop, we talked about the judging criteria. I think that I emailed that out. If I didn't, let me know and I will send it out. So that kind of talks about, it's the criteria for the semifinals, but it's the criteria you need to keep in mind basically for the whole thing, because round two you'll be pitching to the same judges that are going to be judging the semifinals, and they'll be giving you feedback based on the criteria that I shared last time. So they'll be wanting to see what, how you incorporated the feedback that they gave you based on that criteria. So does anybody, looks like most people have done the poll. I'll share the results just so you kind of see what everybody is up to. Does anybody have anything that they want to share from customer interviews or anything else that they've been doing? Anything you want to get kind of specific feedback on? And Jackson, the next slide I'm doing is going to be a whole timeline of dates. So. All right. Nobody
Yeah, I
has
just
any.
have a
Yep, go ahead.
yeah, I just have a quick question.
Yep.
So in my case, the customers that I'm trying to interview, they are manufacturers, and there are only a finite number of manufacturers over Indiana, or if I extend my area to, let's say, Indianapolis, then I think I should have like 15 or 25, 15 to 25-ish people whom I want to talk about. So I just wanted to know, like, what will be the questions which will be targeted by the judges. Well, whether it will be more of a quantitative based, like I have seen, like you shown that folks have done 75 interviews and so they have more data about it, or that will be more about how you implemented, like, let's say, the feedback from 10 people or 15 customers. In my case, since I don't have a lot of customer base to have data on.
Right. So a lot of it is based on the quality of the interviews that you're doing. If you can show that understand your customer, the problems that they're facing, and how you're solving that problem, and you've gained some insights from the interviews that you've done, say you've either validated or invalidated some assumptions that you've made based on those interviews, and if you've made any pivots based off what you learned in those interviews, that's kind of more important than just having 100 plus interviews. But the number is a little bit of part of it. If you remember from the criteria I shared last time, for basically the very good, the being rated a 5 would mean that you would have roughly 60 interviews. But really what the judges are going to be looking for is that those were quality interviews. You didn't just survey people and not actually talk to them, have a conversation where you could learn. So just kind of keep that in mind. You want to shoot for, I would say at least like 50 interviews, but make sure they're quality. If you have less than that, I would I would just make sure you're really focused on what you learned from the interviews that you did.
Got it. And just a follow-up question on that is, I'm not finding a better way to kind of document this. So in my case, I cannot record the interviews. I just have to, note down things in front of the customers because and try to stress on those points. But is there any way to document these things so as to well represent it in the competition when facing the judges?
So I would just, like you say, like keep notes. Do you have a teammate or are you doing this solo?
I don't have a teammate in from Purdue, but I'm doing solo right now.
Okay, I was going to suggest if you have a teammate, have somebody else be there taking notes. But I think you want to, in your presentation, be keeping track of maybe some specific quotes that a customer has said and be documenting, this is how many people that I talked to, this is how many people, validated this point. This is how many people said this specific thing because the judges will be asking, what are your customers saying about that and, how many people said that to try to quantify the problem a little bit.
Right.
If I can also add, Suyash, are you doing the interviews in person or kind of through Zoom?
Well, most of them are from Zoom, but I'm scheduled for some of the interviews in person.
Okay, well, the ones that you're doing on Zoom, you can actually ask permission, but record the interview
Right.
and then take some notes, but then, jot down things afterwards.
That's a great point. Yeah. I'll do that from the next time.
If
Thank
you're
you.
in person, you could also like have your phone out and be at least recording the sound that happens. You don't have to necessarily set up a whole video camera thing, but at least, kind of transcribing what's happening so you can focus on the conversation that you're having unless like I'm trying to write down every word that this person's saying.
Right. I got your point. Thank you for your help.
Yep, no problem. Okay. Anything else anybody like some feedback or help with?
Hi, Emily.
Hey.
I had more of like a logistics question about like the round one deliverables. I was just wondering like what was going to be included in those, or if you're going to like go over those later in the lecture.
Yeah, I'll just go over that right now really quickly since I think a lot of people probably have questions about that. So
Yeah.
these are kind of the dates of things. So round one, it's the reason you can't see it in Prolent yet is it's not technically open. And I didn't open it until 2 weeks from now, which is the date of our next workshop, just so you're very clear about what it is that I'm expecting from you before you actually upload it. So if you go into Prolent, there will be, it's not available yet, but there will be a form called the round one form where you will input information about your team. So you'll put all your team members and then also what you're expected to deliver basically it will be due March 19th by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is an initial business model canvas. So whatever you started out with, and then your current business model canvas. So whatever pivots you've made, any changes that you've made to it, we want to see the initial and where you are at, like at the time that you're submitting it. And then the video, which will be, I would say try to keep it less than 5 minutes just because we'll have, possibly up to like 40 of them to watch. So between 3 to 5 minutes, just talking about your customer discovery journey. So talking about all the customer interviews that you've done, what you've learned from those, what your biggest insights were. If you've made big pivots based on that, like I know the hair care team switched to a totally different idea. So kind of talk about what led to that decision. If you didn't make a big pivot, talk about how your customer interviews validated those assumptions that you had made. So basically, it's just talking about what you've learned through the whole process of doing all those customer interviews.
Okay, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Yep. So that will open up in 2 weeks at like midnight. And you'll have a couple of days to submit that. So Friday is the March 19th that you have to submit that by. And if you don't submit that, you can't continue into the rest of the rounds. It's not meant to be a elimination round necessarily. If you haven't done any customer interviews or anything, we might talk to you about it, but it's really just for us to check in with everybody, know where you're at, and know who's interested in moving forward in the competition into round 2. So if you don't submit for round 1, then you won't move on in the competition, basically. But as long as you submit that, then everybody is expected to move on to round 2.
Okay. Is it okay, like, if we didn't have an initial business model canvas? Because I don't know, I think something must have happened to where we must have not watched like the first workshop that we had. So yeah, we never really worked on a first business model canvas. We have like a business model put together, but yeah, we just didn't work on a formal one through the competition.
Yeah, so in the form, there'll be 2 spots, and both are required that you upload a file there for the initial and current, but you could use the same file in both and just say, this is our
Okay,
model. We didn't have an initial and change. This is our like one business model.
okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yep. So then for round, and by the way, is everybody registered on Prowlant and you know what I'm talking about when I refer to it? Just want to make sure. Give me a thumbs up or something if you know what I'm talking about. Okay. All right, so for round 2, you'll need to submit kind of some pre-documents. Round 2 is actually happening live on March 31st, but a week prior to that, we'll need you to submit a few things so that we can get everybody scheduled into their right feedback sessions. So by March 24th at 11:59 p.m., you'll need to submit an executive summary and your business model canvas again. You may not have made any updates since round 1 to it, but just so we have it all in one place. By that date so that you can be included in the feedback sessions that will happen with the judges on March 31st from 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it's mandatory that you participate in those live feedback sessions, and it will give you a lot of super, super valuable feedback that will help you do really well in the semifinals, because the judges that are participating in that, at least most of them will be the same judges in the semifinals. So they will have the criteria already that the semifinals scoring will be based on. So they can give you kind of direct feedback on your pitch in order to improve it over the next week or so. I guess you have almost 2 weeks before you submit for the semifinals and participate in that. So you definitely want to participate in that. If you know that you have a conflict during that time, usually if you have a class or something, you don't have to be there for the full 2 hours. Your part will be a 10-minute pitch with 10 minutes of Q&A afterwards. So I would allot about 30 minutes to it. If you have something going on during that time, we can usually give notes to get out of class if that's what you have going on, but you don't need to be available for the entire 2 hours. It'll just be your slot, and we'll send those out probably. You're submitting things on the 24th, so a couple days after you submit your documents, we'll send you what time and what room that you're in. The reason I can't send you a link or anything like that yet is because we're hoping to use a new platform, Philo, for this instead of doing a typical Zoom with breakout rooms, because that can get a little difficult. We're just not entirely sure if that virtual space is going to be set up by the 31st yet. So I will let you know on that. But yeah, the format of that is you'll be giving a 10-minute pitch, and then the judges will have 10 minutes with you after that to give feedback on your pitch, ask you questions, and then also give you feedback that you can incorporate into your semifinals. So to participate in that, you have to submit those pre-documents, the executive summary, and the canvas via a form on Prolent by the 24th at midnight. And in our next workshop on the 17th, we're going to be talking about the executive summary. So if you don't know what that is or you don't have one put together, we'll be going over that next time. And I'll also be emailing out some kind of template examples of executive summaries and things that are typically included in one. So that should help you prepare to submit for that. And you'll also need the executive summary for the semifinal round. So that just kind of gets you one step ahead in having that ready already. So then the semifinal round, it's extremely important that you get all of your documents submitted by April 11th at midnight. That is because even though the semifinal live event is happening on April 14th, we'll be sending out your recorded pitches and your executive summaries and canvases to the judges so they can review ahead of time. So on that day, when they stop by your booth in the virtual space, they can just kind of ask you more clarifying questions. You don't have to give your pitch 5 times over every time a judge comes into your space. So that will open up on April 7th, and you have until the 11th to submit all of those. So then on the actual day of April 14th, in the morning, I think it's 10 a.m. to noon is when you'll be expected to be in your virtual booth, and you'll have your materials posted, your executive summary, your canvas, and then judges will kind of come in and out of your space asking you those clarifying questions to get to know more. So it's likely they will have already entered their scores into the Prolent platform for you based on what we emailed out to them prior to, and then when they talk to you, they might go in and just kind of update a little bit. And then that same day on April 14th in the afternoon, we'll announce the 5 finalists, and then you'll pitch right then from 1 to 3:30, I believe, is when the finalist pitches will happen. So you won't know that you have made it from the semifinals to the finals until about 12:45, and then the first finalist will begin pitching a little bit after 1. So you need to have a final pitch ready because it'll be kind of, I don't know if you get this reference, but Price is Right style, where we just call you, and the first couple of teams we might give them a little heads up so you're ready, but you won't get much of a heads up. So everybody will just need to be ready with a final pitch. And then we do plan to offer practice pitch sessions in between the feedback sessions and semifinals. So those would be optional. We'll have a Calendly where you can sign up for a slot, likely held around the April 7th timeframe. That's just if you want some extra practice. So if you got some feedback from the judges during those live feedback sessions and you want to pitch again to our internal team, like Arnold, Murillo, and I, then you can sign up for one of those slots for just a little bit of extra practice. Does anybody have interest in doing that? I want to kind of gauge, do you think that practice pitches will be, okay. I see some nodding, some maybe, so, okay. All right, does anybody have any questions about that? That's a lot of dates and deliverables and stuff, so I'm sure there's probably some questions.
So I have a question, Emily.
Yep.
So for the prelims, before the round 1 starts, is the submission, like does the deliverables contain only just signing up on Prelint and submitting our company's basic pitch in a description?
Yeah, so if you're already registered on Prolent, that's all you have to do for the preliminary, which is what we're in now. Basically, the preliminary round is just this whole workshop series. So there's nothing you actually have to submit for that. The first thing that you have to submit is the round 1 form, which has the video and the canvases.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, just a quick question. And by documents, you mean the executive summary and the model canvas, right? Or anything else apart from that?
For round 2, that is the executive summary. For round 1, it's just the initial business model canvas and your current one, if those are different, and then your 3 to 5 minute video talking about the customer discovery journey. Round 2 is when you'll have the executive summary, your updated canvas, and that's all that you have to submit for round 2.
Great. That's it.
And our next workshop on the 17th, so 2 weeks from now, we're going to be going like way more in depth into what we're expecting out of your round 2 semifinal and final pitches and deliverables. So we'll go more in depth into the executive summary and what we're kind of expecting to see in your pitch decks. And then a week after that, it won't be 2 weeks after, it'll be on the 24th. We have our last workshop, which is a how to pitch workshop with Sarah Norris from When You Leave the Room. So she gives some amazing tips on how to pitch in general, but also since the last couple of years, we've had to do this virtually. She gives really good ideas on how to present yourself better virtually, because it's a little bit different when you're pitching on Zoom versus in person. So I highly, highly recommend attending that workshop, which is on the 24th at 5:30. If I know we're recording this, so if anybody's watching this on YouTube, if you don't attend any of the other workshops live, I highly recommend attending the one on the 24th with Sarah Norris, because she gives like really great tips, and I've seen companies who have gone through her sessions that then participate in competitions or go pitch to investors, and they do incredibly well by utilizing the tips that she gives. So highly recommend attending that. That'll be extremely helpful. All right, any other questions? All right, so we will move on then. So if you remember last week, we talked about channels and we went through the marketing funnel that's shown here. So these are just some reminders of a few ways that you can gain awareness for your product, service, whatever it is that you're working on. So these are the ways that you can pay for it. And there are also a few ways that you can get free or earned awareness. So tonight we're going to take this a little bit further, and we're going to talk about what the cost is of acquiring customers through your channels that we discussed last time. So first, what is customer acquisition cost? So a company's customer acquisition cost is the total sales and marketing costs required to earn a new customer over a specific period of time. So the total sales and marketing cost includes all the program and marketing spend, salaries, commissions, bonuses, and overhead, everything associated with attracting new leads and then turning them into customers. So a lot of businesses use this metric to determine their profitability because you're comparing the amount of money that you're spending on attracting customers against the number of customers that you actually gained. So here is what the actual formula is. So it's your cost of sales and your cost of marketing added together, divided by the new customers that you acquired. So a little video that helps understand customer acquisition costs a little bit better. Troy from Math Ventures explains it well. Lola's going to drop a link for the video into the chat. this tends to work out better than watching the video through Zoom. So if you can follow the link that Lola, I believe she just posted, it's about 5 minutes long. Go and watch that on your own. And then when you're done, come back and just type into the chat, I'm back or I'm done or something, so I know that you've watched it and you're back. So I'll meet you back here in about 5 minutes. Arnold, did you have anything to share about the video or?
Why don't we go through it and I can do mine at the end.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah,
Alright.
it actually got me thinking on what the CAC and lifetime value for the big giants like Amazon, like how do they calculate that?
Mm-hmm.
It got me to thinking on that.
So this kind of fits well into this here. So this graphic here shows just kind of some rough estimates of what customer acquisition costs could be based on sales complexity. So something like an app might just take a few dollars to acquire each customer, but if you look at the right side of the spectrum over there, there are those kinds of solutions that require, salespeople going out, visiting places, and kind of significant investment and getting each customer. So, $2,000 might seem like a lot to spend to acquire one customer, but if that customer, is buying something that's $500,000 or $1 million, or over time they're going to be, their value to you is $1 million, like $200,000 is kind of a steal to get them then. So before we even get into, how you might calculate your customer acquisition costs, does anybody have an idea, want to take a stab at estimating where you and your solution might fall on this range? And then at the end, we'll kind of come back and see if you still think that that's how much it'll cost you to get each customer. Anybody want to take a guess where you might be?
I have a question, like, since my idea is like a marketplace and there's sellers and buyers, so I would also have like seller acquisition costs as well as the actual people who would buy the product, right? And so feel like it's harder to think of seller acquisition costs, like the people providing the service, because without them there is no service. So it's kind of like
I would think of them like both groups as customers. It's going to cost you to acquire both. That's my opinion. I don't know if Arnold has a.
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, I would just lump them both. Because like what Emily said, it's like you calculate, you take your total marketing cost. So that's your cost to market to people with the parking spots as well as people who want to rent them. And then you divide it by how many people, like how many customers you got, how many paying customers you got.
Emily, so I'm wondering, can you expatiate a little bit on the meaning of each of these?
Yeah, so freemium would be, something like an app where it's free for a person to use and they just pay for, additional kind of premium features. A no-touch self-service might be like you're selling on a website. So you don't actually use a salesperson to do it. Somebody's just kind of getting on and buying it themselves. They don't need anybody kind of interacting with them to make that sale happen. And then like the light touch is it requires, maybe not an actual salesperson, but some sort of software that's reaching out to somebody, like somebody puts some information into a website, which we'll go through this a little bit in an example. And then either a system or a person will actually reach back out to them. And then, high touch, basically as you go farther to the right, it takes more people and effort to make it happen. So like field sales is going out into the field. So if you're selling something to universities, you send a salesperson, a sales rep to actually go to universities across the country and be talking to customers to try to make a sale happen.
I have a question. So if you were to run like Facebook or Instagram ads, would that be under like the light touch probably?
Arnold, what do you think?
It-
Is that
So the Facebook ads is just one marketing. It is really your marketing cost. What this is kind of more referring to is what does your sales process look like?
Oh,
So
okay.
I see an Instagram ad and I click on it. Then what? Do I go to a website and I can just buy it?
Right. Yeah.
No touch self-service. I can do everything. Or do I need to talk to a salesperson? Do you need to find out if I'm qualified? So now the more people you need, the higher that cost is.
Gotcha.
in our next
Okay.
example, like the next few slides will kind of go through like ads on, Facebook, Google, whatever. So that might help make you
Okay.
understand a little bit more.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So Jackson, what do you think? Where do you think you guys are since you?
Probably somewhere between no touch and light touch. I think a lot of what we're planning on doing is like Facebook ads to a website where they could buy our product, or maybe like running a Kickstarter or something like that. But it would once we have like our ads up, there wouldn't be much involvement between us and the customer, if that makes sense.
Mhm. And so your customer is the same as the end user.
We haven't really figured that out yet.
It could be, it doesn't necessarily have to be the end user.
Yeah.
It could be a family member. It could be
Yeah.
a doctor, it could be a director of a nursing home that wants to do a bulk buy for their own patients. Primarily, which is where we're going to have to be strategizing on who to like go for first. A good chunk of the people that we have interviewed, we found like through that their loved ones. So let's say that I'm not going to say actual names, but real names, but the wife, I'm going to call her Susie, her husband has suffered from a stroke and he has to have adaptive living at their home in order for him to have some independence. So his wife or a nurse doesn't have to do everything for him. So the wife would be kind of our customer, and the end user would be her husband, because the wife's going to be the one going online and getting the tools and equipment and the gifts that help her husband kind of get that source of independence back from the event that took it away.
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting with your guys's idea is there are a lot of different approaches you can use. And so when you look at, okay, if I'm going to, Instagram or Facebook ads, that's somewhere on the left. So let's say it's in your example, it's just going to go to a website. They can, like on Amazon, they can click and they can buy however many. That's going to cost you somewhere between, maybe 10, 20 bucks to acquire a customer. And then you got to figure out, okay, well, how much does it cost to make? How much am I going to earn for that? But Zach, you kind of made an interesting comment I heard was like, what about bulk sales? It's a really interesting balance between, do I sell to 1,000 individuals who each buy one unit,
Right.
or do I sell to one person,
who
who's much
buys
harder
1,000.
to sell to, but he or she's going to buy 1,000.
Yeah. In which that case, I mean, I guess for the future, it would probably have a salesperson pitching to like nursing homes or hospitals or
Yeah.
rehab centers. So it, kind of could be either.
Right.
Or
So
both.
you could almost imagine a situation where for you guys, and maybe it is field sales, where you have a salesperson who's going out and acquiring a customer could be a whole hospital system, a whole nursing home system, but they're going to buy $100,000 worth or $200,000 worth, depending on how big the unit is. And suddenly you may say, oh, well, $50,000 customer acquisition cost is way high.
But they're
But
spending way more, right?
you're buying 100,000. It's like, that's actually a pretty good business.
Yeah.
Spend 50,000, I get 100,000. I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
But you could argue, well, on the freemium, the Facebook ads, if it's $20, each person's gonna have to buy 4 or 5 spoons at $4 or $5 each, and I'm still only gonna make a couple bucks.
Right.
But if I can get 1 million of them, that might be okay.
Yeah. What would you recommend to sort of figure out like which route to go? Like just going through interviews?
So 2 things. One is like on the right side, interviewing bulk buyers
Okay.
would be key. And then on your low touch side, it's really experimenting. So, okay, if I had a $1,000 budget or even $100 budget, and I blasted Facebook ads, would it work? How many do I get? What's my rough customer acquisition cost? And then it give you a sense of, okay, does this even make sense or not?
Right. So just trial and error on the low end and then interviews on the high end, because really you couldn't know without spend like a large upfront investment to figure out if that works.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you.
Anything else on this before we move on to kind of go through an example of actually figuring out a customer acquisition cost?
So the only thing I'll add is, if you remember what Troy said, when he used the term blended customer acquisition cost. So again, using Jackson and Zach's idea is, okay, maybe they're doing both. Maybe they're having some that they're doing online, some of their sales are online and some are bulk. So what you don't want to report is, oh, our customer acquisition cost is the sum of the two. It's understanding and separating, okay, I'm sending out a person, how much am I sending to the bulk side? And if I'm just doing my online ads, what am I getting? And knowing what your customer acquisition cost is by customer segment.
So for having the parking app, that would be, you might have a different customer acquisition cost for your sellers than the buyers of the spots. All right. So here you can see the customer acquisition cost funnel. So obviously we like funnels in marketing. There was a few funnels last time. Now we have another funnel. So you acquire the customer, then you activate the customer, and then retaining that customer is important. So this is the most logical way to grow your customer base. Once you've retained the customer, they're likely to refer others. So if you remember last time we talked about the viral loop and how it goes back, the referral loop is similar to that, in that a customer that becomes a loyal customer of your brand will turn around and likely tell others, which helps you acquire customers for free, which can then lower your average customer acquisition costs. So hopefully you can see all this. There's a lot of pictures here. So your click-through rate is the ratio of users who click on a specific link compared to the total number of users who see it. So something that Arnold and I were talking about earlier is that a lot of people will say, well, we'll do, a Google ad, or we'll do website ads, and we'll get 1,000 people to see it. So then 1,000 people will, go to our website and, be exposed to the thing. But not 100% of the people who see your ad are going to click on it and actually end up on a landing page. So you'll see with this example, 2% click-through rate. It depends on a number of factors. The next slide will talk about what can affect that click-through rate to make it either higher or lower than that. But if you consider a 2% click-through rate, so 2% of the 1,000 people who have an impression of your ad will then end up clicking on it to get to a landing page, which would be like your product page on your website. So there's a couple different ways. That 0.6% there, it might go directly to purchasing closed deals. So that might be on your, no touch, self-service kind of thing. They end up on the page, they like what they see, they just buy it, it's done there. But if you have a more high touch situation, then you go through the rest of this process, which is getting from they see the ad, they land on your landing page, maybe 3% of those are converted into raw leads, and then maybe 20% end up being qualified leads, and then 10% of those end up being a closed deal and actually purchase your thing. So let's kind of go into each one of those sections with a little bit more detail. So like I said, your click-through rate will vary based on a few different factors. So across different industries. So your industry might be a higher click-through rate average. Where you're physically located might make a difference. The platform, what's in your ad, so the ad content. So if you have really good eye-catching content that gets people to click on it, you will have a higher click-through rate. But ad placement is a big thing. If you know your customers, if you've done your customer interviews well, you really understand your customer, you know what magazines they're reading, you know what websites they're on, you know everything that's important to them, and you place the ads in just the right spot that the right person is going to see it, that increases your chance that somebody's going to click on that. So you could have higher than 2% if your ad content isn't very good. If you're placing it in all the wrong places, you might have less than 2%. So those are a number of factors that can influence how many people are actually even getting to your website from seeing the ads. And then there's a couple of different ways that this can happen. So we talked last time about paying for awareness versus earned or free awareness. So here you're paying for the clicks through, Google Ads, something like that. That is your paid demand. So that could cost, $1,500 per 1,000 clicks. So it costs you $1.50 per visitor that ends up on your page. Organic share would be, I really like a product, so I share the website, the product page with a friend of mine. So that costs the company $0 for me to be able to do that. So if you average that out between the two, that would be an average cost of 75 cents per visitor. But you're not done. So the cost of a raw lead is, I forgot there's all these animations here. So if you look at an optimistic conversion rate of a raw lead from, right, let's go back here. So this is people just landing on your website, on your product page. So to get them as a raw lead, you take that 75 cents per visitor and you divide it by a 3% conversion rate. So 3% of those people will end up becoming raw leads. So when you do that calculation, then it ends up costing $25 per raw lead. So a raw lead is, oops, sorry. I didn't know that all these built out. I just copied and pasted. So the raw lead is somebody who may or may not become a customer. They may not go any farther than just landing on your page, looking around. They may not be qualified to actually be reached out to by a salesperson. So how you get a then raw lead to become a qualified lead. So then if you consider maybe 20% of those raw leads will then become a qualified lead. So a qualified lead, someone who's gone through some sort of process where they're providing information to your company that qualifies them as a customer. So they filled out a form saying, you know, sometimes I've been on a website where I'm interested in using some kind of software. And so I fill out a form that says, this is the industry that I work in. This many people work at my company. This is the specific product I'm interested in. You know, please send me more information, or you know, schedule a demo or something like that. So this is somebody who's likely to become a customer and is worthy of, you know, a salesperson actually reaching out to them. So then to get your cost of acquiring that qualified lead from your raw lead, you would divide again by that 20% conversion rate. And then from a qualified lead to a closed deal, so they've actually purchased the thing, if you take a 10% conversion rate out of that, then you would divide that 125 costs to get them to a qualified lead by the 10%. And so each closed deal would cost you $1,250 to get to. And so this is your marketing cost. It's not the entire customer acquisition cost. This is kind of half of that formula. So here, so to figure out how many website visitors you need to have to get one closed deal, you can work backwards. Why are all these in weird order? So if you work backwards, so you have your one closed deal, you got one person at the end. You divide that by your 10% conversion rate, then that means you have to have at least 10 qualified leads to get one closed deal. To get those 10 qualified leads, you have to have at least 50 raw leads. You can see the math over here. And to get those 50 raw leads with the conversion rate, you need to have at least 1,667 visitors to your website. So basically, to close one deal, you need over 1,600 people just visiting your website. So like I said earlier, people will say, you know, 1,000 people saw our ad, so we could get, you know, sell to 1,000 people. Well, to get one, you have to have at least 1,600 people even getting to your page. So you have to consider all of the people that you're losing along the way. That not every person that sees your ad is immediately going to go and buy the thing or be somebody who's qualified for a salesperson to reach out to. I know it's a lot of information at once. Does anybody have questions before we move on to the next part? Or anything, Arnold, you want to add to that?
No, this is, we specifically put this in here because it's a more complex example. And so yours might not be this complex, but we wanted to give you kind of a case study of what a complicated one looks like. And this was a specific example of, this is real data from a software, a SaaS company.
Yes, I forgot to mention that. I borrowed this from someone else's slides and I forgot what kind of company it was that he was actually. Do you remember if it was a specific company that he actually got this from? Was it
It's from Passageways.
Passageways? Yeah, that's what I thought. All right. So then this shows what the sales cost is. So all of that before was your marketing costs, which is about half of it. This is the sales cost. So if you take those 1,667 visitors at $2 each to make them become raw leads. So that might be, it may not be an actual salesperson reaching out. It's kind of what software are you using, what have you invested in that would cost you, you know, $2 each to get that person to become a raw lead, to get them just on your website interested in the thing. And so then you consider a cost of $20 for each of those raw leads to become a qualified lead. So maybe you have a software that once somebody fills out a form on your website, it automatically reaches out to them, sends them more information, but they haven't maybe been touched by an actual salesperson, been called yet, something like that. And then those 10 qualified leads that become closed deals, that would be, maybe a cost of $200 each for the salesperson's time of working with them. And so if you add all of those together, that final sales cost is then $6,334. So like we said, keep in mind that this is a little bit more of a, complex example where there's likely, maybe some field sales or at least high touch sales going on.
So I have a question, Emily.
Yeah.
So I want to clarify this with respect to what I'm doing. So in my case where I have two customer segments, okay, I have student customer segments as users, okay, for my platform. Then there's the employer. So the employer is actually the buyer. Ultimately, they're paying to recruit students through Pythons. Okay, but then we need students, a lot of students on the platform first, just like social media platform like Facebook, for example, where you need users on a platform. Then you have the company advertising to them. So something like that. In this case, it's recruitment. Okay, you have students as users, and then of course you have the employers. Okay, so I want to clarify. Does it mean that, for example, the sales cost would be, for example, the cost it would take to acquire the students to have them be part of the platform? Then the marketing cost would be, for example, what it would take to market or to get maybe one employer. Does that make sense?
So I think like we were saying earlier, you would have kind of different customer acquisition costs for getting the employers on board than the students using the platform. So it may cost you more, but you will have kind of sales and marketing costs for the buyers, the employers, and also for the students, you'll have marketing costs. If they're not actually paying anything for it, then I don't, maybe Arnold, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I wouldn't see you having like sales costs because you're not having like salespeople or anything reaching out to the students.
Right. So Peter, who's going to be paying you?
The employers.
Right. So so yours would be similar to Ravi's one, the parking one, where most of your costs will be probably sales to the employers, but you may have some marketing to get students or to get the students on.
Yeah.
But I think that'll be much lower.
Yeah.
And so majority of your, but it's a similar concept of you have a two-sided distribution you need to deal with, and you need to advertise to both to get your platform going. But ultimately, it's kind of so I would start with your blended one of, okay, let me do all my advertising. So whatever sales it costs that I spend, and then you divide it by the number of customers you get.
So imagine, for example, maybe I need like maybe 10 students to get one employer, for example. Like, so the kind of platform is such that I need to have students on the platform first before employers can buy in, right? So
right, because they're the ones who are paying you.
Yeah, because they are the one paying me. So I need students first on the platform, then employer comes in later, something like that. So it's like as part of getting employer to be on the platform, the cost for acquiring students is also a component, something like that. If you go on what I'm saying.
Well, it depends on how you're going to get students on the platform. If it's just advertising, then that's probably a marginal cost compared to the cost it's going to be to get an employer on board.
Okay.
Right, because the student will be similar to the freemium of you'll just be doing ads, and it's going to cost you maybe $10 a student.
Yeah.
Like you said, if you need a couple hundred students, you're talking a couple $1,000s.
Yeah.
But for the employer, they're going to be paying thousands of dollars, presumably, in which case, right, your marketing costs will be much higher to them.
Yeah, that's good. All right, got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All right, so like I said, those are the two that you add together then. So your marketing costs that we talked about with the click-through rates and everything that ended up being $1,250 per closed deal, plus the sales cost of actually closing that deal of $6,334. So the total customer acquisition cost is $7,584. So that's kind of a more in-depth example, and maybe not everybody in this group is going to have something like that where there's, you know, high touch sales, anything like that. But I have an Excel file that Lola's going to drop in the chat. Hopefully you can open it. It's just something that you can play around with different conversion rates. So if you think your click-through rate's going to be higher than 2%, you can play around with that. You can kind of just play around with the numbers and try to figure out what your customer acquisition costs might be. It's all going to be estimates at this point, but there is the first tab is just kind of a simple customer acquisition cost. The second tab is more in depth with some direct sales kind of stuff. So if that's the route that you're in, just kind of play around with that. I think that sometimes actually getting into an Excel file and just like putting in numbers and seeing how they turn out. Did Lola drop there? She got it. It can help you kind of get a better understanding of what your actual cost will be, and if you can tweak certain things, you know, if you're having to pay a marketing person a little bit higher salary, depending on where you're going to locate that person, you can see how that makes a difference in your customer acquisition costs. So that's in the chat if you want to download that and just kind of play around with that. So we're coming back to this. So after going through that example and understanding a little bit more, does anybody have any further ideas about where they might fall on the spectrum, or, you know, if you might have two different customer acquisition costs based on your different customer segments? Any other thoughts on this before we move on? Nope. All right, so retaining the customer is a lot cheaper than getting a new one. So you need to also consider how much in revenue each customer that you're acquiring is going to bring in over the lifetime of their relationship with your company. So that leads us directly to customer lifetime value. So the lifetime value is the predicted revenue that one customer will generate over the course of their relationship with your company. So to calculate that, you would take the average amount of what they're spending times the number of times they purchase per year. So if you had a subscription where they were paying $10 a month, you know, 12 times a year times the average length of the customer relationship in years. So you may not have somebody, they may be making a one-time purchase, or it might be somebody that is going to stick around with you for 5 years. So you calculate all of that in order to determine the customer's lifetime value. So it's important to consider the lifetime value at the same time that you're thinking about your customer acquisition costs. So if it's going to cost you $25,000 to acquire a customer, you want to make sure you're getting more than that out of their lifetime value. And maybe you're not going to get that out of the very first purchase, but if you're considering that they're making a number of purchases per year and that they're going to be a customer of yours for several years, then you might recoup that cost within, you know, a year or so. So the lifetime value to customer acquisition cost ratio is something that you should consider. So it will help guide your spending habits for marketing, sales, customer service, things of that nature. So it's kind of a brief snapshot of how much your customers are worth compared to how much the business is spending to attain them. So to get that ratio, you take your customer lifetime value, what we just showed being calculated on the last slide, and divide that by the cost to acquire them.
So does this mean you do this for so in my case where I have two different customers segments, do I have to do this for the two different customer segments, or I take some average, something like that?
Arnold, do you want to answer that?
It's for you. It would just be for your employers.
For the employer, okay.
Again, it's only for the people who are paying you.
Okay, okay.
Question. So what would be considered like a good LTV to CAC ratio? Like, would it be anything over 1 to make sure you're profitable, or?
So I'll get to that in the very next slide. So this shows kind of an out of balance business model. So if your cost to acquire a customer is $25,000, but they're only bringing in $1,000 over their lifetime, obviously that's not good. You don't have a viable business. You're not profitable. It's not going to work out. A well-balanced business model is when their lifetime value is, larger than the cost to acquire. So ideally, it should take you roughly about a year to recoup the cost of acquiring the customer, and that ratio should be 3 to 1. So in other words, the value of your customer should be 3 times the cost of acquiring them. If it costs you $1,000 to get them, they should be bringing in about $3,000 in lifetime value. So if it's closer to 1 to 1, so that means you're spending just as much money on attaining the customer as they're spending on your product, and it's kind of like breaking even. If it's higher than that, if it's 5 to 1, then you're likely not spending enough on sales and marketing, and you're probably missing out on opportunity to attract new leads. So 3 to 1 is kind of the ideal ratio. Any questions on that? I think that might be the last. Yep. So any questions about anything about the lifetime value or customer acquisition costs? Or Arnold, did you want to, I think you said you had something to add after we did everything.
Yeah. So I wanted to go through an example. I just spoke with the student today, and he has a business where he's selling a microscope, kind of a STEM microscope kit. And he sells it for $50, and it costs him $10 to make. So, I mean, just very silly example. So Zach, since you got your camera on, so what's his profit, if you don't mind me picking on you? So $50 to make, $10 to, make and ship.
And he's selling it for how much again? So
50.
$50. How
Yeah.
much?
He's selling it for 50, cost him $10.
Well, it depends on how. I'm probably maybe $20 profit.
Right. So what did I leave out?
You left out advertisement and other sources to like actually get the customer to buy and purchase.
Right. So that's actually a common mistake a lot of students make is, oh, if I sell it for 50 and I cost me $10, I'm making 40. But you're right. We left out his customer acquisition cost. And so he told me that, and I asked him, I said, what is your customer acquisition cost? And he gave me an answer that Troy would be very proud. He says, it changes every day. Because he looks at it, he has an e-commerce business, but he told me that last year it was $9. So similar to Jackson's question of, okay, I should have done this on the slide, but he's basically, his customer acquisition cost is 10. is 9, cost him $10, $50 selling price. He's making about 3 to 1. 4 to 1, right? It's $40, cost him $9, roughly a 4 to 1. It's actually a very profitable business. And that's why he is doing great, making a ton of money, right? Just printing money doing this. And I said, well, where is it today? He says, it's $25 today. So suddenly it's now less than, it's barely 1 or 2 to 1. And so it's becoming a much less interesting business. And again, remember, these are microscope, like home microscope learning kits. So Jackson, can you imagine? So what are reasons why last year it was selling like hotcakes and this year it's not doing so well?
I mean, he could have spent less on marketing, so it's not getting to the right people, maybe.
What about things that are going on in the world? What was different last year that might be different this year?
Right, there's more people at home than last year because of COVID, and this year
Right.
we're more in person.
Exactly. So last year, everybody was working from home. Everyone was trying to figure out how to teach their kids at home. They're buying this stuff like hotcakes, right? And so his customer acquisition cost is $9. Today, it looks like there's a vaccine. My kids are going back to school. It's getting better. Maybe that not as many people need it.
Right. Gotcha.
And so the other really interesting thing I talked with him about was the lifetime. What do you think Jackson, what do you think the lifetime value for one of his customers is?
I mean, maybe they purchase it once or twice.
Maybe once. So his customer acquisition or his lifetime value of a customer is $40.
Right.
That's it. It's a one-time thing. So what he told me is like, hey, this is becoming less and less of a good business because my CAC is going up and my lifetime value is fixed. So what he's trying to figure out is I need to find a business where I have a much longer lifetime value, where they need to buy this over and over. So he's discovering this, but I thought it was a really great example of, he recognized like I told him, he's like, there was an imbalance in the market, meaning COVID hit, he had a product that everybody needed, was able to sell it really well. The world's changing, it's becoming less interesting, and he's trying to kind of like think about where to pivot his business. And I can't remember, one of you were asking about the advertising. And so I asked him also, well, he said that he primarily uses Facebook. He said he's tried Snapchat, he's tried Instagram, and he says he gets nothing from those other ones. So for whatever reason, the majority of his customers are on Facebook. And what's nice with the Facebook ads is that he can be very, very targeted.
Mm-hmm.
So for him, it's a female who's affluent, who's probably on the age of 28 to 38, who's got young kids at home.
Right.
The sad part about the social media is Facebook knows all of this about you, and they can sell him that data, and he can be very specific. And so he knows exactly. Like, he's not just saying, I'm just going to use Google AdWords or just put these ads out. His are very specific, and yet his CAC is still between 10 and $20.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So it makes it interesting for you guys, because if your customer acquisition cost is going to be 10, 15, $20, makes you think twice about how many spoons a person needs to buy,
Right.
or what the cost of the spoon is, because it's the same thing. It's like, I'm kind of assuming okay, maybe this is a $5 or $10 purchase, but if it's a $50 purchase, maybe it's okay. If it's a $10 one, you'll probably be struggling.
Right. I think.
But also, as you're going through your customer interviews, knowing roughly the price point of where someone finds value in this, because even though it may only cost you $1 to make,
Right.
it can be so valuable that daughter who's taking care of the parent said, "Oh, this, I pay $100 for this thing because now my dad can eat."
Mm-hmm.
Or save so much time because the healthcare person doesn't have to feed and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are all these things you got to start like interviewing and sorting out, because they're all intertwined.
Okay. Yeah, I think our kind of cost is like between 15 and $20 is what we're thinking. And that was based off of like competitors. That's what they like, the weighted spoon and swivel spoons, that's what they charge for theirs. So that's kind of where we got that number.
Another thing with like when it comes to like our interviews and a lot of data that we got, and the one of the most common questions that we got was just like, do you guys have a fork? Do you guys have something else? Like we're just one product, and that kind of just brings like we only have so much on our plate. Like we can't have a whole line of products, but we can definitely have aspirations in the future because like for the microscope business, like there's like you said, they'd probably purchase one microscope. If he would want to like increase his sales and make his company better, he'd probably want to get more product out there that are around that same line. So we could get some more adaptive living needs. So instead of just doing the spoon, we can possibly use that momentum to help bring on other existing products to make a more centralized marketplace for those that are coming for any adaptive living needs. So
Right.
we could essentially just take our invention, use that momentum, and then have them come to our marketplace to basically, they have really affordable wheelchairs, they have really affordable walkers, they have really affordable so on. I mean, that's just aspirations and just talking, but definitely has been in a thought thought that we've had because you can only be extremely profitable and stable with one product for so long, it seems like.
Yeah. Being a one product company is very difficult. But I do like the way you're thinking of, okay, it's not something you're going to do immediately, but having a plan saying, okay, once we get the spoon out and we get to a certain revenue, now we got to start our next product, whether it's another fork or another adaptive product, to know that you have you can make a suite or a platform of things to sell.
Does anybody have any questions? Want to talk through what you any questions you have about your own, customer lifetime value or acquisition costs?
What
Some of
was
this
that
is
software that in that video he mentioned? It said it was Excel on steroids. Like, is there something wrong with Excel, or is there another standard out there that's easier to use for this kind of work?
The software he was talking about is called Tableau, but there's nothing wrong with Excel. But it's something where for them, if they're in the hundreds of thousands of customers, that's a lot of rows and columns to deal with. Ravinderjeet, did you have a question or comment?
I was just thinking, so like some of this is like hard to project, right? Like our estimates would be pretty rough in really having a good sense of like these actual costs that we would have.
Yeah, I think like for you especially, like the lifetime value might be, yeah, because I guess you can consider the number of games, but you're thinking about like on the seller side of you have to get them to, sign on to using the platform. So how long might that one's, property owner use it? I'm not sure if you've considered the aspect of the tailgating, since they brought that up in interviews, if that could maybe add to their lifetime value. Yeah, I think for you though, like using, Facebook ads, Google ads and stuff for the buyers of the spots, people looking for spots, you could probably figure it out that way. I don't see sales cut, not for the buyers of the spots, but you are estimating. So you're not going to have like down to the penny exactly what it's going to cost you to acquire the customer. But as far as it goes, like for this pitch for the competition, you want to have a good estimate that you can back up how you got there.
But I think even with your assumptions, while there are a lot of guesses, you need to make sure you have this balance that's shown even with your assumptions. Like, for example, we just take your case, I'll just make it up as I go along, but if you're just going to do Facebook ads, it's going to be, let's pick a number, $20 for customer acquisition cost. And let's just hypothetically assume that that's rolled in with the parking, like the people who have the spots, advertising them as well. So if I said, okay, if you told me that, okay, I'm going to earn $1 a customer, $20 customer acquisition cost, that means they got to use the spot, they got to use my app 20 times before I even break even. 6 home games a year, that's 3 years. I'm not sure it's going to work. So you got to charge more than $1. If whatever you were thinking of, right? And so you can get a sense, like you can just work through the math and just play with things and figure out, okay, does this work out? Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just even like a simple 3x3 Excel sheet, you can just start playing with it. It's like, oh wait, I really need to charge, or if the parking spot's going to be $20, just taking 10% or whatnot's not going to cut it. I need to like take $5. And now you can almost kind of get a sense when sometimes you wonder why are they charging so much? It's because they're doing this math. It's like, otherwise it's not a profitable business and they're not going to be in it.
Gotcha.
So this also gives you a sense, like this is your kind of bottoms up approach, meaning if I want a lifetime value to customer acquisition cost of 3, then I need to charge this much, knowing that my CAC is roughly here. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And then from the top down, it's like as you're interviewing customers, they may say, "Oh, well, I totally pay $5 to do this," or right, or like again, when you're interviewing the people who have the spots, they may say, "Oh, well, maybe they don't care what you're charging, but if they're paying them $10 and you're taking 10, they'd be happy with that." Right, so you see how this is sort of what I call the fun part. While it's very frustrating, it's like, okay, you interview the people who have the spots to figure out what it's worth to them. You do this model and figure out what you need to charge. And then like, what are people on the app willing to pay? Like, again, like I'm guessing an person who's using an app is not going to be willing to pay, is going to be willing to pay the $20, which is what a parking spot on the open market costs. But who takes what cut is very important. Right? I can see the light bulbs going off your head. Like,
It makes me think you have a reason for what commission to charge, I guess.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's totally dependent on what we estimate your customer acquisition cost would be like. But I think you'll get, with some of these assumptions, you'll probably be pretty close, right? I mean, but again, like even just throwing out this number, it's like, okay, you can't take $1 a transaction.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to be viable.
Yeah.
Right. Only assuming that you're doing home football games and whatnot. But
yeah,
like if you're doing basketball, maybe you could throw in a few more, but
I agree. Yeah. Also, yeah. I just think I need to work through the numbers and see where I get to.
But also, like again, if you interview customers, the people who are looking for a spot, how much more of a premium would they pay to be able to reserve it?
Yeah.
Right. So it could be, oh, I'd be willing to pay $25 because I know $20 is the open market rate, but I would be willing to 25, especially because I know I'm going to be late to this game and I don't want to park 2 miles away in the freezing cold in February going to a basketball game. I want a parking spot up front. And suddenly, okay, you can take the $5 premium as your commission. Anyways, I could go on for a while on this topic. So we'll back to Emily.
Yep. So we're a little over time. So our next workshop is in 2 weeks. So that entire session will be dedicated to prepping for the competition round. So the round 1 is due March 19th. So we'll mainly be talking about round 2, semifinals and finals. But if anybody has questions about what's supposed to be turned in on the 19th, you have 2 days to do it after we talk on the 17th. So the round 1 submission opens up on that day. So that's when you can start submitting. You can actually see the form and start uploading things if you're ready. And then we'll be talking about feedback sessions, how to prepare for that, the semifinal deliverables. So be sure to join us for that so you're prepared for all of the rounds. And I'll also be emailing out some kind of templates and stuff that will help. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask any right now, or email the BMC email with any questions that you have. And nobody's really using the Discord, but if you want to hop in there and ask questions, I am it's just like up on my computer all day. So if you just have a random thought and want to ask me a question, I'm typically just hanging out in there. All right, well, everybody have a good rest of your night, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you. Have a good one.